Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us for this session on citizen politics. This is an opportunity for all of you to discuss and participate in a conversation about the future of democracy, and for me to say that I've met Aaron Sorkin. So we've already, at least at my end, achieved the aim of the session. I hope that we'll achieve a brisk and informative and conventional wisdom-busting conversation for you all. Before we get started, I hope you'll indulge me for 1 minute as I try to frame the debate that we have. A conversation about citizen politics could not come at a more opportune time. In November of last year, as we all know, Barack Obama was elected the President of the United States in a campaign that was widely seen as the most technologically advanced of any in history. 25% of Mr. Obama's voters were connected to the campaign electronically. And yet, at the same time, what you've seen, or you are seeing in this country today, is that the Speaker of the House of Commons has been forced out for the first time that any man has had to suffer that indignity since 1695, when Sir John Trevor was forced out. He has been forced out not because people dislike him, but because they are so furious and so disenchanted with politics. And I just thought it's worth starting at that point to realise that whilst we live at a moment where we see technology capable of transforming politics, of reconnecting people with their politicians and the powerful, actually what we're seeing is people leaving the public square in their droves. And if you'll indulge me 1 minute, I thought that I would consult my individual portable information device, what I call the iPod that I brought with me here. And I find it incredibly useful in helping me find things that I didn't know that I was looking for. And Rachel Sylvester, one of our columnists, makes this point in the paper this morning. Now Mr. Martin has come to embody the disconnection between Parliament and the people. His failure to understand public concern about MPs' expenses, his attempt to block the release of documents, and refusal to reform the system have made him the figurehead of a political establishment that is dangerously detached from voters. And Rachel concludes by saying, this is not a velvet revolution. As Bob Dylan sang, the line it is drawn, the curse it is cast, the order is rapidly fading, and the first one now will later be last, for the times they are a-changing. And it just struck me that no Zeitgeist would be a Zeitgeist without a quote from his Bobness. So on that note, I thought we should launch into a conversation about citizen politics, but keenly aware that what we are really talking about is the yearning that people have for a better democracy, and at the same time, the really frightening disenchantment they have with the reality of their politics. And as you will see, we have a formidable panel of people. What I'd like to do is to talk to everyone for about 5 minutes each, because they've each got phenomenal stories to tell, and then open it up to a conversation between us, and then more broadly between all of us. It seems, given the politics we have in our country today, that it would be a good idea to start with Alastair Campbell. Many of you will know Alastair was a political editor, was one of the founders, one of the architects of New Labour, working hand in glove with Tony Blair, brought New Labour to power in 1997. He is, of course, better known as a Burnley fan and a recovering admirer of Britney Spears. Alistair, when you look at politics today, when you look at the election that is going to come to this country sometime soon, very soon, many of us hope, how different will that be from 1997? What do you think, how much do you think technology will have changed the nature of politics?
I think it's changed it a lot in terms of the management of it, but I think you've got to be really, really careful about this. I mean, you talk about Barack Obama, and Barack Obama fought a brilliant modern campaign, but he also fought a brilliant old-fashioned campaign. He had a really clear set of messages. He was fundamentally strategic the whole way through. And above all, he had fantastic organisation. What I think he did was he used the new technology, in a sense, to charge that organisation and also to empower people in every single part of the United States to take his message, very hard, thought-through set of messages, and then take them out to the country. And he also, if you like, empowered and liberated them to do it in their own way. So I think if there's been a change, it's less to do with the technology than the fact that he has embraced the impact of that technology upon the way that people now live their lives and the way that they interact with politics. I think we've also got to be really, really careful not to get... I mean, as you know, my views of the British media are not terribly favourable, but I think one of its weaknesses is a tendency to exaggerate everything, whether for good or for bad. So, for example, Barack Obama comes along and it's like Jesus Christ has come along. Well, I happen to think he's a fantastic politician and will probably be a terrific president. But let's not overstate it. In the end, he's a human being. At the moment, we've got this terrible expenses thing going on. Therefore, let's say that everybody's fed up with politics. Yeah. Not everybody's fed up with politics. People still know that if you want a Labour government to stay in power, you've got to go and fight for it, you've got to vote for it. People care very, very deeply about political issues. And we were talking earlier about, for example, in France, last year, France has not got the liveliest political culture in the world, but when it came to there being a pretty clear choice around clear differences between presidential candidates, they had a substantially larger turnout than the presidential election before. So I think that people are much, much more interested in the issues than they were. They see themselves in a less party political way than they did. There's less tribalism, there's less deference. The media is having an impact that's making politics kind of a bit more explosive. The pressures on the politicians are to be short term when they've got to focus on being medium term and long term. So I think that if whichever candidate in the next election, in a sense, does what Obama did, you've got to understand that some of the basics of campaigning never ever change. What changes is the circumstances surrounding them. You have to adapt the new and the old, and that's what he did brilliantly.
And do you think then that actually these technologies, all this talk about citizen politics, will have very little impact on the nature of the campaign that we see presumably next year? It
probably will, but look, I think Barack Obama, because he is clearly, over the course of a very long campaign, he emerged as the strongest and as the most attractive and as probably as the cleverest of all the people in the field, against some very, very impressive figures, let me say, not least Hillary Clinton. I think he probably would have won, even if his understanding of this modern technology wasn't so good. That being said, he did get it, and that is part of being a modern politician. I think in terms of how people interact with their politics in the next election campaign, we will see an awful lot more of connectivity through the internet and through social networking groups than we've ever seen before. But I still think that the candidate who has the clearest set of messages, who has the best organisation, the best communication skills, is the one that is likeliest to win.
And what do you think, or what did you think, of the Prime Minister's effort on YouTube?
Are people aware of that? Aaron's not aware of it, so you'll have to explain it, James.
And I will do it impartially and factually.
Of course
the Prime Minister...
And then I'll rebut it.
This is how politics works in this country. The Prime Minister made a foray into addressing the problem of MPs' expenses by launching his plan on YouTube, a solo virtuoso performance on YouTube.
Mm. Yeah. See what I mean about they just exaggerate, right? Gordon Brown has been using YouTube as a means of communication for some time. Mm. The problem was not whether or not he did it on YouTube, or whether or not, this is the bit he hopes that you'd seen there on, whether or not he kind of smiled in the wrong places and, to use, I think it was a phrase in your newspaper, looked a bit odd. It was nothing to do with that. For me, it was the fact that it was, as political management, given this was a political management issue, whether that was the right place to do it. So again, I don't think it had anything to do with the technology.
But there is an issue, just wrapping up here before we turn to Oscar, there is an issue, isn't there, about the use of modern technology and modern devices which find you out. That if there's a falsity around it, if there's a pretense at being sort of modern and with it, that actually, rather than enhancing your image, it does exactly the opposite.
I completely agree with that. And the thing is that look, the focus now of 24/7 news, the internet, citizen journalism, call it what you want, the focus of that, particularly on political leaders, is so intense that the only ones who really, really break through successfully, in my opinion, are the ones who are completely authentic. So if you don't get it, then don't pretend you get it, say you don't get it, and hire the people in who are going to get it for you, if you have to do that. Likewise, the whole sort of thing recently about Susan Boyle on Britain's Got Talent, which was one of those things, right? She goes on television, lots and lots of people go on television all the time. Something about it just cut through right round the world. What was it? I think it was a single word. There was a kind of authenticity to it. And people are so used now to seeing the spin, seeing the packaging, seeing all that stuff, which you still have to do, because let's not run away from it either. Barack Obama packaged the whole campaign brilliantly, but he's also an authentic politician who stands for what he believes in, stands for it very deeply. And that's why actually I think Gordon gets a very, very unfair deal, because actually when people say, well, he's a bit of a doer Scott and the rest of it, that's what he is. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with being a doer Scott. Be a doer Scott, understand the things that you really believe in, because he's got deep beliefs, and then go out and deliver the policy that puts that into practice.
All right, well, in terms of people who get it, we're very lucky to have here Oscar Morales. And I was going to introduce Oscar Morales, but actually there's a fantastic story about how Oscar himself was discovered. So I was going to ask Jared to tell us a little bit about the discovery of Oscar Morales.
Of course, and I'll tell this story very quickly because I don't want to cut into Oscar's time, but I remember going to the State Department on February 5th, 2008, and after about an hour of arriving at work, getting probably the most interesting and game-changing task that I've gotten in my entire time in government, which is the Deputy Secretary of State at the time had picked up the Wall Street Journal that morning and read an article saying how Facebook was used to organize the largest protest against the FARC in history, 12 million people in 190 cities around the world. And as one of the few people at the Department of State using Facebook at the time, I was tasked to figure out what the connection was. And so I contacted our embassy, as you do when you have these questions, and asked to be put in touch with the organizers of this massive protest. And much to my surprise, but I guess in retrospect it makes sense, the embassy didn't know the group that organized this because there was no street address, there was no office, there was no paperwork for an NGO that had been established before the Colombian government. And so we didn't know who was in charge, we didn't know who this group was. It was a online civil society organization. So I had horsed around on Facebook at work before, but never actually gone to Facebook for work. And spent about an hour looking for this group and found Million Voices Against FARC and saw that the creator...
And you found my profile, because I had a Facebook profile, of course.
And so I sent Oscar a Facebook message, having no idea if diplomatic security would show up in my office or something else. And I said, are you the one that did this? And did you know the Wall Street Journal wrote about you today? And I told Oscar I wanted to come down to Colombia and meet with him. It was I think the very first diplomatic engagement in the history of the US government via an online social network. And so I went down to Colombia several months later, and I'll let Oscar take the story from there.
Oscar, welcome. We're in danger of giving you a bigger build-up than the Prince of Wales. And to add to that, there's a short video which will tell... Okay. Do you want to introduce it?
Yeah, well, it's a story of the February 4th protest against the FARC, the most dangerous and murderous of terrorist group that has been attacking Colombia for the last 4 decades. The video will explain itself, so I would like you to watch it carefully and enjoy it as much as we enjoyed that day. So
thank you.
The guerrilla group FARC has perpetrated all kinds of terrorist actions against civilians. Detonating bombs, kidnapping people, murdering Colombians. Their incursion into drug trafficking, their criminal record with more than 3,000 instances of kidnapping, and their refusal to release 700 kidnapped hostages still in captivity has caused Colombian society to revolt against them. In December 2007, FARC announced the liberation of Consuelo González, Clara Rojas and her son, Emmanuel, 4 years old, who was born while Rojas was living in captivity. On January the 1st, 2008, the Colombian government disclosed an investigation in which they confirmed that FARC didn't have Emmanuel.
Entre el ADN mitocondrial de Juan David existe una coincidencia absoluta con el ADN mitocondrial de doña Clara González de Rojas.
He had been abandoned 2 years before with several illnesses.
Y hace más de 2 años que las FARC no tienen en su poder al niño al que prometieron.
This news shocked the world. The indignation, the anger, and the frustration became uncontrollable. FARC was deceiving once again the public and would pay dearly for that deception. On January 4th, 2008, engineer Oscar Morales Guevara, who was born in Barranquilla, created a group called 1 Million Voices Against FARC on Facebook, the most successful social network in Colombia.
When I created the group, I remember that I invited my network of friends that consisted in no more than 500 people. But to my surprise, at the 12 hours, there were 1,500 members that had joined the group. The next day, there were 4,000 members. The next day, 9,000 members. At the end of the week, it was 150,000 members. And now we count with almost 500,000 users. From the beginning of the group, I identified many members with strong leadership skills. At the third day, and thanks to the boom of the group, we decided to take things to the next level. And that's when we proposed to make a rally on February 4th, where we invited all Colombian people to massively protest against the FARC.
Many Colombians living in other countries and a large volunteer network expressed their support and coordinated the mobilization in their cities. The march became an international event. Its dynamic involved the use of internet tools such as Google Emails, Google Docs, Google Chat, MSN Messenger, and Skype. They created a website in which they publicized meeting points, contact details, and information about the group and the march. The internet was flooded with invitations to the march. This frenzy strongly captivated the Colombian and international media who, astonished that such a powerful mobilization originated in a social network like Facebook, joined together to broadcast this initiative. City by city, country by country, the organizers prepared everything for the march. On February 4th, 2008, 200 cities in more than 40 countries around the world flooded the streets with more than 12 million people in a simultaneous demonstration against FARC, raising their voices to say, no more kidnapping, no more lies, no more death, no more FARC.
Su propia mano la hiere, que lucha, sueña y se vuelve fuerte, y entre las penas siempre florece. Soy de una tierra que se estremece cuando su propia mano la hiere, que lucha, sueña y se vuelve fuerte, y entre las penas florece. Soy de una tierra que se estremece cuando su propia mano la hiere, que lucha, sueña y se vuelve fuerte, y entre las penas siempre florece.
So, Oscar, that is an extraordinary story and an amazing achievement. I guess your experience has been very different from the point that Alastair was making, which is that technology is essential to political mobilization.
Actually, I'm sorry, Alastair, but I don't agree with you. I mean, for us, technology was our best tool to spread the news about the upcoming march because there were many young people that were really fed up with violence. In my country, especially youth, we grew up watching day after day news of one more kidnap, one more, and there were 3,000 kidnapped at some point. Now there are a few of them, but we were really wanted to express ourselves and scream to the world that no more violence, no more kidnapping. So what we did was to use this magic of the internet. I was telling you earlier that the internet time is quite different time from what we measure through a clock. So when we proposed the march, in a matter of minutes, people were already joining, and in just 1 month, we had it all ready to convince 12 million people to go out to the streets, and the internet was the best tool for doing that. Of course, we needed the support to the traditional media, and the radio and the TV and the newspapers did a terrific job. If it weren't for them, maybe many people wouldn't have been informed about what we were doing. But the best thing that, I mean, the most important thing that captivated the media's attention is that we were young people with no prior experience in politics, with no intention to engage into politics or government.
And what has happened since? Because I think one of the issues that people have around citizen politics, internet-based politics, is it's fantastic for mobilizing people around a particular issue, but can you sustain it? Can you build a long-term movement? Can you build a party?
Well, yes. Yes, we can, because people stayed connected after February 4th, and we were knocking doors in order to keep the clamor of demanding the release of more than 700 people that they still have in captivity. But at some point, we needed to make it legal. So we decided to create a foundation, the 1 Million Voices Foundation, because we needed support from many entrepreneurs and many politicians and ambassadors. And it was so nice to discover that there came a moment in my country where there was unanimity that these 40 years of violence needed to come to a stop. And we were embracing that campaign as young people as we are, and people just believed that we were the right people to do that. Because if, for example, a politician would have started this campaign because he's a political, maybe people wouldn't have paid attention that much.
And if you were advising someone now about starting a political campaign, what would be your advice to them, just simply in terms of the technology they used, how best
to... you have to choose a network that definitely is successful in the country. So I have to remind you that Facebook in Colombia was the most successful social network in place, with almost 5 million users just in Colombia and 200 million users around the world. And also, you have to convince other people to help you, because we didn't have any money to support this. I mean, we did it with no money in our pockets, just screaming and writing emails 24 hours a day. For 1 month, we didn't sleep. And there were so many Colombians out there. I told in the last conference that Colombia is one of the countries that more support people everywhere. We are everywhere, literally. So you convince them. They organized through internet tools. We created a lot of Gmail accounts. Gmail was fantastic for sharing documents. That helped us a lot because we just created, for example, a press communicate. And we just had to publish it one time in Google Docs. And then all our coordinators around the world just log in and will read and will explain to the local media exactly the same words. So it was all simultaneous, the same language, the same press communicate. So media was really astonished that we were able to do that in such a way of organization, thanks to the tools that we had available for free.
Well, that's very good. We will come back to that, I'm sure, in a moment. If you look at your life, it strikes me that it's the story of someone who started out with a few good men and a fascination with institutional power to increasingly more shambolic, but much more social forms of power into the West Wing. And now I understand this work that you're doing on Facebook and a story of Mark Zuckerberg's journey. Tell me, do you think that you have seen in your lifetime a move away from institutional power to what we'd call social power or people power, and whether or not technology is genuinely transforming the nature of political power?
Let me start here. You had said that you wanted to begin with 5 minutes for each of us. I have a strong inclination to yield 4 minutes and 45 seconds of my time to the rest of the panel because I am not often, but from time to time, mistaken for someone who knows something because of the things that I've written. And I want to be very clear. Oscar Morales led an extraordinary revolution in Colombia. I write jokes about the proper way to baste a Thanksgiving turkey. The things that I know, it's acquired knowledge because of some of the things that I've written. You just mentioned, I did just finish, and I mean just finish a few hours ago, the screenplay for the movie we'll be making about the founding of Facebook in the Harvard dormitory of Mark Zuckerberg and his roommates, one of whom was Chris Hughes, who left Facebook to begin and run Obama's entire internet operation. It would not be an exaggeration to say that this young man, and I think he was 23 or 24 when he did it, who no one has ever heard of, got Barack Obama elected president. There are a number of stunning statistics that go along with Obama's election, not the least of which is that more people voted for Barack Obama than have ever voted for any candidate for any office ever in the history of the United States. More young people came out and voted. More of everything in every category. He raised more money than any candidate before. And John McCain did himself no good at all by making a joke which maybe even just 4 years ago might have been charming in an odd dad kind of way, which is that I think he said he doesn't know how to make a Google or he doesn't know how to send a Google. And the idea was, I'm not into this rock and roll music that you kids are into. I'm a sturdy, fatherly type who was old-fashioned, and that was going to be comforting, when in fact it had the exact opposite effect. It scared the hell out of everybody that he didn't understand this technology. I still think, to answer your question, to try to answer your question, have things moved away from the institutions that we used to have into something else? I still think that what you've got there, a newspaper, is still the thing that we trust the most. I'll tell you, I'm convinced that if things had been invented the other way around, if somebody this week said, I've just come up with this amazing thing. It's paper. It's got the news in it. You can take it anywhere you go. You can sit out on the porch and read it with your coffee. You don't need to plug into anything or move anything around. The newspapers would be the hottest thing going right now. But I do believe that it takes a newspaper, a credible newspaper, to somehow put the good housekeeping seal of approval on something that and I'm talking about journalism now, not raising money or raising awareness. I'm just talking about how a political campaign is covered. I still think it takes a newspaper to put the good housekeeping seal of approval on something that we've read on the internet, because the big problem with things that we read on the internet is that there is no legal accountability for anything. A publisher of a newspaper is legally responsible for what's printed in the newspaper. When I write an episode of a television show, the first thing that happens is the network's lawyers vet it thoroughly to see if there's any kind of legal exposure at all. Same thing with a movie. And I'm going to say something, and I don't know if security is going to carry me out the back door or not. But until we figure out a way to organize some kind of legal responsibility, until the carriers, the distributors of content on the internet are held to the same legal standards as magazine and newspaper publishers, as television networks, as radio broadcasters, and as movie studios, we're all going to end up throwing ourselves off a bridge. because there is simply too much content out there that is untrue, and we can't trust it. And so rumbles begin.
Mr. Sorkin, welcome to Britain. Can I ask you, though, one thing, just pick up one issue that you raised, just in terms of the process, and this is going to sound like a glib question, but it's not meant to be. You've spent a lot of time looking at politics, and clearly the politics that you create on screen is much more appealing than the politics that we see on the news. What do you edit out?
Almost anything that you see on screen is more appealing than the version of it in life, whether it's love or cowboys and Indians or a bank robbery. It's going to be more entertaining there. What I do is this, and I was just speaking about this last night at the Oxford Union. By and large, at least in America, by and large in popular culture, our leaders have been, are ordinarily portrayed as either Machiavellian or dolts. I went a different way and showed people who were very competent, extremely committed. I defined patriotism a slightly different way, in a way that wasn't a turn-off. In the 60s, we used to say it's the hard hats versus the long hairs. This wasn't that. These were very patriotic people. And I was doing all this mostly because it suits a romantic style of writing that I have. But there was a certain, part of the success of The West Wing was that there was a wish fulfillment there, that our leaders were genuinely good people, very competent, always thinking about, the rule in writing the show was you can do any joke, you can have anyone slip on a banana peel, you can do any kind of banter as long as we make sure that first we know that these people are thinking about us. That they come to work in the morning, first things first, there's something they're doing, that they're thinking about us, and once you've laid that down, you can do all the shenanigans you want.
Well, on that note, let's turn to good people. Jared Cohen, as you may know, works in the policy planning office in the State Department. And if you ever get a chance, by the way, I would recommend reading Jared's responsibilities, because what it makes you think is, what the hell is he doing here? He's responsible for counter-terrorism, counter-radicalization, relations with the Muslim world, relations with youth, e-media, new technologies. It's a formidable job and a formidable range of activities that you have to engage in. I guess the thing that I'm most interested to talk about now, Jared, is what we've discussed so far has all been about citizen politics, essentially in democratic countries. You wrote a book, Children of Jihad, about your experience of young people in the Muslim world, and I guess I'm interested to know how you see citizen politics developing in non-democratic countries.
Well, actually what I'd like to do in answering that is just even back up 5 years, because back in 2004, when I took my first trip to Iran, I made the mistake that I think a lot of people often make, is to assume that youth don't matter and to assume that technology is trivial. And so I went to Iran in December of 2004 to interview opposition leaders, to talk to reformists as just a student and private citizen. And it's very difficult to do that in Iran, especially when you go in on a tourist visa. And so I found myself having a lot of problems with minders and people harassing me and following me around. So I just started looking around for people my own age to hang out with so I could salvage my experience in Iran and enjoy my time there. And what I found was a youth demographic that defied every stereotype imaginable, but more importantly, I found a youth demographic that was doing very interesting things with their cell phones. I kept finding myself going to these underground youth gatherings and asking various people at these gatherings, how did you find out about this? And they would tell me through Bluetooth. And I had always thought of Bluetooth as that creepy thing that you have on your ear and walk around talking to yourself on. I'd never known that it allows you to also call and text complete strangers as long as they're within a certain vicinity of you. And like club promoters, some of these young Iranians go to the different bazaars and marketplaces and turn their Bluetooth on and wait to find out where the party is, or where the underground book club is, or where the poetry session is, or where the underground political group is. And of course, my first question to them is, weren't you worried that the intelligence services would find out about this? Aren't you worried about being monitored? And a very confident young Iranian told me, nobody over 30 in this country knows what Bluetooth is, so we're not that worried. And It was this moment that fundamentally shifted my interests towards youth and technology for one simple reason, which is I had realized I'd gone to Iran to study the wrong opposition, that the real opposition in that country of 70 million people is the 67% that's under the age of 30. But their big handicap is not realizing their value and potential impact as a de facto opposition and as a demographic, with one caveat, that because of increased access to technology, young people in Iran and elsewhere, and in particular under repressive regimes, are more and more coming to grips and appreciating and understanding their value as a demographic. And so you're seeing this youth identity emerge in very unlikely parts of the world that are ridden with ethnic, national, and sectarian conflict, and there's this common denominator that's developing that's incredibly empowering for a critical demographic.
Well, thank you. Jared, I would go on, but we're in danger of doing the one thing that a session on citizen politics should never do, which is give the floor no chance to speak at all. So what I would suggest is, if there are questions, we'll take 2 or 3 at a time. I know that we've got some quite important speakers following us, so if you could keep those questions short, and of course then Jared or the rest of our panel will have a chance to answer them. A docile, entirely happy populace that is entirely supportive of our political leadership. It's great. In which case, then I'm going to dart back. Is there really no one who wants to fire in with a question? Jared, I guess I look back at it and look at what you've written and the issue that you raise in Iran and think to myself, and now you're working in the State Department, how should this inform, your understanding, inform US foreign policy? How much should we now look to changing the way that public diplomacy works, the US spending on, as you say, the new opposition, young people with new technologies in different parts of the world?
Well, I think that's probably the most important question that you can ask. I worked 2 years under Secretary Rice and now under Secretary Clinton. When I arrived in the Department of State in September of 2006, I would argue that we as a government were infected with what I would describe as digital media giggle syndrome, meaning you couldn't go to a serious meeting and talk about Facebook or Google or any of these digital platforms without fear of getting laughed out of the room. Now I would argue that, especially under Secretary Clinton, if you're not bringing up technology in every single meeting, whether it's about public diplomacy or development or political or economic issues, then you're not doing what the Secretary of State wants us to do. The way that we've thought about technology over the past several years has been restricted to communication and policy advocacy, which is important. But what we're neglecting is that, new technology is a tool that can be used more broadly for policy implementation, for engagement, for organizing and network building, promotion of accountability and transparency, capacity building, training. You can go on and on about how technology can be integrated. And one of the challenges that Secretary Clinton is taking on is fully integrating new technology into our toolkit so that we can engage with the Oscar Moraleses of the world, so that we're not surprised by the million voices against FARC protests, and so that we can support civil society, not just in the traditional sense of office spaces, but the young, unlikely leaders that we're not training at conferences, that we're not interfacing with on a daily basis, because technology is this great equalizer that levels the playing field and makes age and gender and socioeconomic status less of an issue, and instead the unlikely leaders are emerging in places based on the merit of their ideas and how effectively they use these tools.
Well, thank you very much. I see that our time is up. I warned our panel before we came out here that I was going to ask them one final question, which was, in this country there is a £10,000 communications allowance if you're a politician. And if you had that £10,000, what would you spend it on in terms of modern communication to voters? And in answers of no more than 30 seconds, I just wondered whether we could ask our panel how they would spend that £10,000.
I don't know what Gerard's salary is, but I would hire him for however long £10,000 gives me. I would sit him down in front of the Parliamentary Labour Party and ask him to explain, and I think it's really important what you just said, because that's a big shift for America. Because I think one of the things that the last administration really didn't get right was this sense of how you engage, particularly with people in countries that don't necessarily agree with you. and I would then get him to explain to the PLP they've got to get it or go.
Thank you. Oscar?
I guess internet access for Colombians. In my country, only 35% of the population has access to the internet, and despite that, we managed to join them through the internet. But definitely, internet is something that would help a country in more ways than you can imagine. So I would invest in that.
Very much. Aaron?
10,000 pounds is $50 or $60 million US now. I would spread it among the other 4 panelists and tell them to do with it.
Jared.
Well, so I guess that means I have a little more than 10,000 pounds now. So in that 10,000 pounds plus, I would build, I think the US government's most effective use of funds is sometimes acting as a convener, a facilitator, and a matchmaker. And I would build a network of experts like Oscar who have effectively used technology as a force for social change and consolidate them into a network whose expertise can be harnessed so that next time I or another foreign service officer meets an interesting civil society organization in South Asia or Latin America or the Middle East or anywhere, and I ask them what they're doing online and they say nothing or all they have is a website, there's some place that I can send them to so that they can benefit from the best practices of those that have most effectively pioneered this in the civil society realm.
Thank you very much.